And we're going to be continuing this evening in the book, Devil Worship, The Shocking Facts. And we left off on here on page 183 last week, and the particular section that we're in right now, the section that we are in is entitled, I just had the wrong section there, is Serving Yahweh, to serve Yahweh by obeying Him. And this is actually this section actually starts back on page 181. And this word serve, to serve Yahweh, the word service or the word worship, when we see the word worship, worship is simply service, as Pastor has pointed out to us. And last week we saw how when we serve Yahweh by obeying Him, Pastor points out very clearly that service clearly implies a way of life. Okay, it implies a way of life. The house of Yahweh, the keeping the laws of Yahweh, taking on Yahweh's righteous character, is not something that is done in a single 24-hour time period, one time every week. Okay, it's just simply not that way. That's a church. That's how a church operates. Actually, they don't even do it for a 24-hour time period. They might do it for an hour, hour and a half, and go and perform their duty or their obligation they feel. And then they go on about their business, not changing, not benefiting or not changing anything about what they've been doing, throughout the previous week. But the word service clearly implies a way of life, and that's what the house of Yahweh is. The house of Yahweh is a way of life. The laws of Yahweh are a way of life. The laws of Yahweh guide and direct every aspect of our lives. Our interpersonal relationships with our family, with the things that we eat, how we deal with strangers, how we deal with people in business, how we administer justice. How do we judge matters? How do we judge matters fairly? All of these things are embodied in the law of Yahweh. And the whole concept, the whole idea behind that is serving and service to one another. And Pastor, he writes here, he shows here, he said he shows the word service clearly implies a way of life. And through this way of living, one either serves or worships Yahweh by living according to His every word, as Yeshua Messiah stated in Matthew 4:4, but he actually quoted that from Deuteronomy 8:3, or he or she serves or worships Satan the devil by living in a way which actually shows rebellion against the instructions that Yahweh Himself wrote. And that's one thing Pope Francis had said, do we reduce salvation to 613 man-made laws? Well, the laws weren't man-made. The laws were created and given to mankind by Yahweh, the creator of the universe, who created us and gave us these laws to guide our every thought, our every action, not to hinder us in any way, but to free us so that we can live life abundantly without curses, and joyously the way He intends for us to live. That's why these laws were given to us. And this is the very thing that the religions of the world have been fighting for nearly 6,000 years, for over 6,000 years now. Okay, and Pastor, he also wrote here at the bottom of page 181, he says, but not only is Satan being worshipped and served simply because Yahweh is rejected, and that's all it takes is the rejection of a law of Yahweh. But the results of satanic, and he shows here, satanic sex worship is openly manifest in this sex-crazed, lust-filled, perverted, depraved world. Everything we see in this world is somehow tied into lust. It's tied into sex. It's tied into these things. It all revolves around that. And we're going to see how all of these things were actually brought in as we get into our studies a little bit more this evening here. But this whole world now practices these ancient pagan customs, which are now veneered, they're veneered with Christian names like Easter, May Day, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Roman New Year, Valentine's Day. All of these things tie into ancient fertility rites. And we'll be reading and studying about those this evening. So on page 183 over here, in this, in the Encyclopedia Judaica, here it shows the Bible attacks idolatry on two independent grounds. It violates the covenant, and it is useless. Okay, since idolatry is specifically forbidden in Exodus 20, verse 4, its practice constitutes a violation of the covenant. This is grounded on the belief that the worship of, it says here God, but the worship of Yahweh is to be determined by him alone. Okay? Yahweh determines how he is to be served, how he is to be worshiped. He is our creator. He alone has that right. There is nobody on the face of this earth that has lived or that has ever lived or that ever will live that will dictate how Yahweh is to be worshiped. The man of sin that sits on the 7 hills of Rome, you know, he has gone and he and those and his predecessors, you know, have very boldly said that, well, you know, we transferred the solemnity of the Sabbath day to the first day of the week. Well, by what authority did you do that? Well, we didn't have any authority. But the authority, you know, we don't have any biblical authority, but by the very fact that people didn't stand up against us and protest that, that gives us the authority to do that. And everybody follows what we're saying. So there's our authority. There's our proof. Well, what he didn't show and what they don't show, but history shows that anyone who stood for any form of righteousness was killed. They were persecuted. However you want to look at it, persecuted, prosecuted, you know, whatever, however you want to look at it. But anybody who stood up for any form of that was killed and tortured. You know, accordingly, this article continues here, accordingly, any form of worship not specifically prescribed by him is an affront to his absolute sovereignty. It says absolute sovereignty and omnipotence. In other words, what's being said here is, accordingly, any form of worship that is not specifically prescribed by him, you know, it's not going to be accepted. You know, you cannot take, there is no way possible, and the law tells us this, the scriptures tell us this, that you cannot take the way that the heathen are worshiping their gods. You cannot make an unholy tradition holy. You cannot do that. It's impossible. There is no way you can take a tree and decorate it with silver and gold and put it up in your house and say, well, I'm not doing this because of it has to do with Nimrod or anything like that. I'm doing this because Yahweh is the creator of all things, and this is representative of the, you know, the thankfulness that I'm getting for, you know, the vegetation that comes from the earth. You know, I mean, you can't do that. It will not be accepted. Yahweh clearly states that. You cannot worship Yahweh your Father in the way the heathen worship their gods, for their customs are vain. And that specific custom is actually outlined. It says that you can't do this. It will not be accepted. It is an abomination to him. And why would you want to do that anyway? Why would anybody want to take a custom that has these ties, as we're going to see here, these filthy ties of, you know, the holidays, as we're going to get into here, you know, that center around the sexual immorality? Why in the world would you want to even take those customs and ascribe them to the creator of the universe? I mean, it makes no sense why anybody would want to do that. But Pastor shows here, he says, this article here, you know, again, it continues here. It says the second, let me see here. Okay. It says the second argument can be properly understood in light of the pagan belief that the natural phenomenon, such as fertility, rain, health, and so on, may be controlled by idolatry. Well, no, we understand. We know what controls our climate, right? We understand why or what is causing the weather we're experiencing right now. The bitter cold, the sleet, the snow that's falling right now. We know that it's the microorganisms in the air, you know, in the firmament, in the firmament that are causing these things. It's not some being, it's not some god, it's not some demon somewhere that's doing it. It's what Yahweh had set in motion for the benefit of mankind. That's why, you know, that is what is controlling these things. And we have to remember that worship, this worship is service, and that this service leads to taking on a character. And who we choose to serve, who we choose to follow, is going to dictate what character we're taking on, either a righteous character or an evil character. Remember, Psalm says that the laws of Yahweh are perfect, and they will convert the whole person. The laws of Yahweh embody, they show us Yahweh's perfect righteous character, how he deals with every situation. So it's clear to see, Pastor writes here, from this source reference, that anything contrary to Yahweh's laws is the worship of Satan, while obedience to Yahweh is the worship of Yahweh. It doesn't get any simpler than that. You belong to whom you obey. Also from this source reference, it has been clearly presented that Yahweh will only accept the worship and service which has been written in the Holy Scriptures. If any worship or service is being practiced, but it is not written therein, it is simply performed to the devil herself, to Satan, to the god of this world, and to no other. To understand this concept of idol worship to the pagan mind, let's read from the Encyclopedia Judaica. Now, remember Deuteronomy 12, 29 to 32. Or 12, actually verse 30 here, it says, be careful. And this is a warning that is given. And it's given not just here, but it's given throughout the Scriptures. It says, be careful not to be ensnared into following them, which shows that that there's going to be trickery that's going to be involved. There's going to be subtleness that is involved here, because that's what it means to be ensnared. Ensnared means to be trapped. If a trap isn't hidden, if it's just sitting out there, it's more than likely not going to be fallen into. But it's the subtleness. Remember back in Genesis chapter 3. Remember the subtleness that Satan works with. She was more subtle and crafty than any beast of the field that Yahweh had made. So be careful not to be ensnared into following them by asking about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? I will do the same. Verse 31, you must not worship Yahweh your Father in their way. Is there any doubt that Yahweh is not going to accept that type of service, accept that worship? For every abomination to Yahweh which he hates, they have done to their gods, and they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifices to their gods. Whatsoever I command you, be careful to observe. Be careful to observe it. Be careful to do it. You shall not add to it, nor shall you take away from it. See, Yahweh's very clear about what he expects, right? So in order to understand this concept of idol worship to the pagan mind, let's read the Encyclopedia Judaica, which shows here, it talks about these living idols in pagan religions. An idol in the pagan mind, now this is what is going through their minds here. An idol was a living and feeling being. The idol was not the God itself. The God had a separate, although not independent, existence from the idol. If you remember back from the ancient philosophies that we studied when we were studying the book, Did Yahshua Messiah Pre-Exist, we can see where all of these things came from. Remember, a lot of these things came from Alexandria, Egypt, which was the seat of God worship. And there's actually some symbols that did come from Egypt, as we're going to see here a little bit later. One of them is sitting right now in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. It's known as the Washington Monument. It's an obelisk that was actually transported from Egypt to Washington, D.C. But it shows here, it says, the idol was not the God. The God had a separate, although not independent existence from the idol. The God's spirit dwelt within the idol and was identified with it. The God was not confined to a single idol or a single shape. Rather, his spirit dwelt within many idols or varied shapes. It says the fundamental principle of pagan religion is the identification of a God and its idol. The God perceived and sensed whatever happened to the idol. The prayers, the ceremonies, and the cult offered to the idol were fully sensed by the God. Since the God identified fully with its idol, the images were living idols. And so that's, again, what was going through the pagan mind. And to the pagan mind, the identification of a god and its idol was fundamental. The god perceived and sensed whatever took place with its image. In the following pages of this article, you will come to a clearer understanding at the cause of sexual lust, where they came from. At the cause of the sexual lust, the perversion, and the depravity, which has now overwhelmed the world, and it's prevalent again throughout the world. It's one of the most the poles of sexual sin, this lust and this perversion, is probably the strongest pull that exists today, and it's a very very powerful pull. It says, because this is the result of this world, the worshiping and serving of Satan the devil. Now, the holidays of Christianity and the worship of ancient paganism. Now, as we're going to see, that all of the worldly holidays follow a cycle of ancient pagan worship, and there are certain times of the year that actually follow this cycle here. But Easter, Pastor shows here, is one of the two greatest festivals in Christianity. Was originally celebrated at the New Year festival of the vernal equinox, and the vernal equinox is when you have equal periods of day and night during the springtime. I think it's during the springtime, and that's around that's around the time of Easter, or when Easter is actually set. It says, during this holiday, a priest and priestess engaged in ritual intercourse to secure agricultural fertility for the coming year. They engaged in these acts to secure agricultural fertility for the coming year. Where do the world's blessings come from? They don't realize it, but everything that they have is coming from Father Yahweh. Everything. Has there ever been an instance where we've seen blessings that come out of rebellion? Can anybody ever think of an instance where a blessing has ever come out of rebellion? I can't think of anything. Rebellion is not rewarded. There are consequences that come from rebellion, definitely. But this world, this world, they don't realize that their blessings are coming from Yahweh. But it shows here in the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, it's going to show this. It's going to show some things here about this. It shows the realm of the gods consisted of male and female deities. So you had male gods, you had female gods or goddesses. It says the creation of the world, according to the Babylonian creation story, occurred at the mating of Apsu, the freshwater ocean, with Tiamat, the saltwater ocean. The Mesopotamian goddess Inanna, later called Ishtar and Astarte, was the embodiment of love and the power of procreation. Numerous clay and stone figurines depicting sexual activities have been found on the sites of the temple of Ishtar, which is, again, the same as Astarte, the same as Easter. Human sexuality was thought to be connected with the fertility of nature. During the New Year festival celebrations, a priest and priestess engaged in ritual intercourse to secure agricultural fertility for the coming year. It says, a Ugaritic chief of the gods, El, El was the father of the gods, the creator of the earth, and his consort, Asherah, called creatress of the gods. The next generation of gods was ruled by another male-female pair, Baal and Anathoth. Anath. It says, to the pagan mind, Pastor writes here and clarifies, he says, the gods and goddesses were stimulated by his own imitative sexual practices to do the same depraved things that he was doing. In other words, the people in their minds thinking, well, the gods are going to see us doing this, and they're going to do the same. And when they do this, that is going to ensure the fertility of the ground and the fertility of the earth. This was for the purpose of producing fertility in man, beast, and agriculture. in man, beast, and agriculture. And then here it says, on page, let's see, here, reading from volume 3 of volume 3, pages 932 and 933, you'll find this fact that is clearly written here. It says, the role of sacred prostitutes in the fertility cult. So now you see, sacred prostitutes. So these prostitutes are actually set aside. They're consecrated to the service of these gods. It says, the prostitute who was an official of the cult in ancient Palestine and nearby lands of biblical times exercised an important function. This religion, notice, it was a religion. This was considered a religious practice. Remember what remember what he taught us about sodomy. He said sodomy wasn't necessarily just the act, but it actually had to do with a religion. He said it was actually a religion. He says, this article continues here. It says, this religion was predicated upon the belief that the process of nature were controlled by the relations between gods and goddesses. Projecting their understanding of their own sexual activities, the worshippers of these deities, through the use of imitative magic, engaged in sexual intercourse with devotees of the shrine in the belief that this would encourage the gods and goddesses to do likewise. And only by these relations among the deities could man's desire for increase in herds and fields, as well as in his own family, be realized. It says in Palestine, the gods were Baal and Ashtoreth were especially prominent. And he shows here, he says, attached to the shrines of these cults were priests as well as prostitutes, both male and female. Their chief service was sexual in nature, the offering of their bodies for ritual purposes. Okay, from the Zondervan Pictorial Bible, we see here about information about Easter. And it shows Easter that there is no celebration. Of course, here it shows here, it says there is no celebration of the resurrection in the New Testament, which is what Christianity feels that Easter is today. It celebrates the resurrection of their Savior, Jesus. It says the Jewish Christians, that shows here, linked it with the Passover and so observed it on the 14th day of Nisan, regardless of the day of the week. But the Gentile believers celebrated the resurrection on the Lord's Day, Sunday. This difference was settled at the Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D. And we've read a lot, we've learned a lot about the Council of Nicaea, about what Constantine instituted during that time, right? It says that it was at that time which ruled that Easter should be celebrated on the first Sunday after the full moon, following the vernal equinox. This is the system that is still followed today, and the date of Easter was varying between March 22nd and April 25th. So it can fall at any time during that time period. And anybody remember what takes place if Passover and Easter just so occur to fall on the same day? It'll never occur on the same day. Easter and Passover will never occur on the same day, because Easter will be held, I believe it's the following Sunday, because Constantine ruled that they wanted to have absolutely nothing in common with the hostile rabble of the Jews. Okay? So, in the previous chapter of this series, we have proven that Easter is none other than Astarte, Ashtoreth, Ishtar, and Semiramis, the fertility goddess of every pagan land in this ancient world. Remember, these gods and goddesses were known by different names. Even though they were the same, they were just known by different names. And they were known from Babylon to Rome. As we have also previously proven in chapter 4, Easter's symbol was the sacred pole, which was also a phallic sexual symbol. According to the International Bible Standard Encyclopedia, we find that Ishtar was the goddess of sexual love, fertility, war, and passions. I mean, it sounds kind of like an odd combination there of sexual love, fertility, war. But it shows here, it says Ishtar, this was the most important female deity, assimilating the functions and characteristics of many other goddesses. Her name came to mean goddess. She was the morning and evening star, and we know that's Venus. Goddess of sexual love and fertility, and surprisingly also of war. The latter is understandable if she is viewed as the goddess of passion. Now, from the International Bible Encyclopedia, Volume 1, we find this information. In Babylonia and Assyria, Ishtar was the goddess of love and war. An old Babylonian legend relates of how the descent of Ishtar into Hades in search of her dead husband Tammuz was followed by the cessation of marriage and birth in both heaven and earth. Page 186 here. Yeah, I'm going to try, see if I can get this to come in over here. But that is one depiction of Ishtar, and she's depicted wearing this ceremonial headdress. And as we'll see here, as we go a little bit, as we look a little bit further, when you look at the, let's see, this is one. No, she's depicted wearing this ceremonial headdress there, and that is, like I said, one of the depictions of her. Now, the other goddesses of Babylonia, who were little more than reflections of a god, tended to merge into Ishtar, which we see, how she was combined. She took on the characteristics of these others, who thus became the type of female divinity, a personification of the productive principle in nature, and more specifically, the mother and creatress of mankind. You see how they replaced Yahweh there, and they called Ishtar the mother and creatress, the creator of mankind. In Babylonia, Ishtar was identified with Venus. Like Venus, Ishtar was a goddess of erotic love and fertility. Her chief seat of worship was Erech, where prostitution was practiced in her name, and she was served with immoral rites by bands of men and women. And it shows here, as the goddess of war, she is seen unclothed, weapons in hand, on a galloping stallion, and charging into war. And then from the Encyclopedic Dictionary of Religion, he says, we find that a young woman could behave like a temple prostitute by sacrificing her virginity in honor of this abomination. It says, a sacred prostitute. Prostitution officially provided for at a sanctuary known to have been practiced in Mesopotamia, in Canaan, in the Greek cult of Aphrodite, the cults of the Magna Mater, and the Magna Mater was the cult of the Great Mother, and of Attis in Asia Minor, and elsewhere in the Middle and Far East. Its sense and purpose entailed genuinely religious elements, along with those magical and merely sensual, for it did at best celebrate human sexuality as a religious thing and divine gift, although in practice it was a little more than an excuse for immorality. So, they, under the guise of religion, it was simply just an excuse for immorality. And it shows here that a woman might offer her virginity as a sacrifice by playing such a role once at the time of her marriage. Now, I looked up this sacred prostitution, and there's an article here from Wikipedia, and it shows here about this ancient Near Eastern and the ancient Near East that talks a little bit about this. And it shows here, it says, ancient Near Eastern societies along the Tigris and Euphrates River featured many shrines and temples or houses of heaven dedicated to various deities. According to the 5th century BC historian Herodotus, the rites performed at these temples included sexual intercourse, or what scholars later called sacred prostitution. And part of this article here, it shows here, it says the foulest, and this is these words here, it says the foulest Babylonian custom is that which compels every woman of the land to sit in the temple of Aphrodite. Okay, this Aphrodite, this goddess that we're reading about here, and to have intercourse with some stranger at least once in her life. I mean, it was a custom here that compelled. I mean, it wasn't a choice; it was a compulsion. They had to do this. It says, many women who are rich and proud and disdain to mingle with the rest drive to the temple in covered carriages drawn by teams and stand there with a great number of attendants. But most sit down in the sacred plot of Aphrodite with crowns of cord on their heads. There's a great multitude of women coming and going here. It shows here, it says, passages marked by a line run every way through the crowd by which the men pass and make their choice. Once a woman has taken her place there, she does not go away to her home before some stranger has cast his money into her lap and had intercourse with her outside the temple. But while he casts money, he must say, I invite you in the name of Limmuwdyah, is what it says, and that's the Assyrian name for Aphrodite. It doesn't matter what the sum of money is. The woman will never refuse, for that would be a sin. The money being this act, the money being made, or being, it says, the money being by this act made sacred. So she follows the first man who casts it and rejects no one. Then afterward, after having discharged her sacred duty to the goddess, she goes away to her home, and thereafter is no bribe, however great, that will get to her, it says here. But that is just, that is just one of those, one of these rights, this part of this, part of this abomination. And it shows here on page 187, Pastor continues, and he says, the following information about Easter is from the Dictionary of Mythology, Folklore, and Symbols. And it shows Easter incorporates some ancient spring equinox ceremonies of sun worship in which there were phallic rites and spring fires, and in which the deity or offering of the deity was eaten. It says the festival is symbolized by an ascension lily, a chick breaking its shell, the colors white and green, the egg, spring flowers, and the rabbit. This name is related to Astarte, Ashtaroth, Easter, and Ishtar, the goddess who visited and rose from the underworld. Easter yields enduring eros, or the enduring dawn. And, these things that you've heard of the flowers that they like to sell about this time called the Easter lily. I wonder where that came from. We've all seen pictures in the stores and in advertisements of a chick breaking its eggshell. How many times have you seen pictures of a little chick with a piece of an eggshell on its head, standing in the lower half of the shell? It's very common. Spring flowers, the rabbit, colored eggs, all of these things. Notice where they came from. They came from these ancient fertility rites. As this source reference has told us, Easter incorporates the ancient spring equinox ceremonies of sun worship, in which there were phallic rites. And it says phallic rites are the worship of the male and female reproductive organs as symbols of regenerative power. And here in the Babylon, in Collier's Encyclopedia, here it shows about ancient Babylon Ishtar festival. We see about some of these rites here. It says the Babylonians regulated their feasts and festivals by the calendar of a local temple. The Easter festivals were symbolical of Ishtar, that is the goddess of love or generation. As the daughter of Sin, the moon god, she was the mother of God. She was the mother goddess. As the daughter of Sin, the moon god, she was the mother goddess who presided over childbirth, and women in her honor sacrificed their virginity on the feast day or became temple prostitutes, their earnings being a source of revenue for the temple priests and servants. You see what's behind it again? You see what's behind that. You see their earnings becoming a source of revenue. As we have clearly read for ourselves from these source reference, the name Easter is derived from this Easter, E-O-S-T-R-E, which is an to understand the original of this Christian name was Ishtar, the great fertility mother of Assyria. This world has not let go, Pastor shows. This world has not let go of Satan worship. It holds on to it dearly even today. You know, even though they don't realize what it is that they're worshiping, they know not who they worship. But they hold on to these traditions. They're convinced in their mind that there's nothing wrong with these traditions. In Ucker's Bible Dictionary, we see this information about Ashtoreth, the goddess, and her symbol. It says the plural of Asherah, as Asherim, is a pagan goddess. And Asherah appears as a goddess by the side of Baal or Baal, whose consort she evidently came to be, or at least among the Canaanites of the south. Now, a consort is simply a partner or a companion. It can be a wife, husband, spouse, especially of a reigning king or queen, and that's what a consort is. You know, it's a partner, companion, wife, husband, or spouse, especially of a reigning king or queen. It says, however, the most biblical references to the name point clearly to some cult object of wood, which might be worshipped or cut down and burned, which was certainly the goddess's image. Her cult object, whatever it was utterly detestable to faithful worshipers of Yahweh. And indeed, the stone pillars seem to have represented the male god Baal or Baal, and Asherah was represented by this tree or a pole. Other names of this deity were Ashtoreth or Astarte, Anath, and Anath, frequently represented as a nude woman bestride a lion with a lily in one hand and a serpent in the other, and styled Kodshu, which is the holiness, that is, the Holy One. In a perverted moral sense, she was a divine courtesan. A divine courtesan. And a courtesan is, a courtesan, for lack of a better term, it shows here, is a woman who has sexual relations with a rich or important man in exchange for money. Okay? Or it's a prostitute who has relations with wealthy and powerful men. That's what a courtesan is. It says, in the same sense, the male prostitutes consecrated to the cult and prostituted themselves to her in honor were styled as sodomites. And again, remember that sodomite, you can see here, how they were called sodomites. It has to do with this religious practice. It had to do with this religion. Characteristically, the Canaanite, the lily symbolized, it says, grace and sex appeal, and the serpent, I can't even pronounce that word. Fecundity? Okay, we'll go with that. She and her colleagues specialized in sex and war, and her shrines were temples of legalized vice. In other words, they were temples of legalized vice. They were I can't even think of the word. Houses of ill repute. They were houses of prostitution, is what they were. It says her degraded cult offered a perpetual danger of pollution to Israel, and must have sunk to sordid depths as lust and murder. They were glamorized in Canaanite religion. Now notice this here shows that her practices were glamorized in this Canaanite religion. And Pastor, he's going to talk about this. He's going to expound on this here. He says, digressing here, I would draw your attention to the last phrases in this source reference. These statements, And she and her colleagues specialized in sex and war, and her shrines were temples of legalized vice. Her degraded cult must have sunk to sordid depths as lust and murder were glamorized in Canaanite religion. And Pastor, he points out, and has been pointing out for years, that these very same things are being glamorized today. These very same things are being glamorized today through nearly every form and media. The same sex worship which was being practiced in ancient paganism is now being published and promoted throughout the world to the young and old alike. It says, remember, sexual relations for ritual purposes was the ceremony of the fertility cults. Now, please notice that sex, unlawful acts, were abominable to everything holy and was practiced and condoned in the pagan religions. And Pastor, I love Pastor's writings because he gets very bold in these writings. He says, I dare to call your attention to today's modern religions, which bring forth the same unlawful sex acts. Okay, the religions today are they're still bringing forth these things. I call your attention to Christian preachers who proclaim, don't stop practicing this sin. Don't stop practicing these sins. Don't stop practicing this pagan sex worship. Don't stop sinning. Don't put an end to it. But use condoms to protect yourself against the curse of AIDS, against the curse of gonorrhea, against the curse of syphilis and chlamydia, of every curse which comes through the practice of unlawful sexual relations. Don't stop it. As you innocently watch your television sets, or as we used to watch our television sets, or simply go to the movies, you will see the same perverted sex worship which is being promoted by the churches. Remember, the Vatican, the Seven Hills of Rome, they actually have an office in Hollywood that regulates these things, that goes by them, so they can control what is being taught to the people. Because, make no mistake about it, man, the things, things are being taught through the media. That was the purpose. That was the purpose of entertainment. That's why entertainment was devised. It was as a teaching tool. It was as a distraction. It was to distract people from picking up the scriptures and reading. It's kind of difficult sitting here picking up and reading these words. It's much easier to sit back and sit in the audience and sit here and watch a play, because, boy, that really captures the imagination. It catches your eye because there's movement. There's all this stuff going on. And it excites the mind to see those things. But at the same time that we're sitting there, that the people are sitting there, just because it doesn't take any thought. It doesn't take any effort to sit there, right? People can sit there, they just keep their eyes open, they can have their drink next to them, their popcorn, whatever they want. And they let everybody else do the work, and they just soak it all in. You ever heard somebody say, well, yeah, you ever heard somebody back in the day, what are you doing? Nothing, I'm just sitting here zoning out in front of the TV. What does that mean? That means you're relaxing. Well, you're relaxing. What are you doing? You're letting your guard down. You're not thinking. You're letting whatever is coming forth go directly into your mind. What kind of damage? Look at what Pastor has taught us about the subconscious mind. Look at look. Remember what we learned when we were in the book. There is someone out there about the ability of the subconscious mind to sit here and be able to take something, to take a book like this, and we can go, okay, all right, that's there. Look at yep, that's there. That's there. Wait a minute, there's something written over here, all the way over here. Okay, I can get that in my peripheral vision. Okay, that's right there in the subconscious mind. It's there. It's there. It's there. All that stuff is being placed into the mind. Now, we can't recall it right now, but Pastor shows that when we're given control over the subconscious mind, we can. Look at the subtleties that are being brought forth in the entertainment industry today. How is that influencing the people? What kind of influences are those bringing about? All we have to do is open up a newspaper. We don't even have to really open up the newspaper. When we come here on Sabbath, Pastor has blessed us with the ability to see the news that is affecting prophecy. We see prophecy being fulfilled in the news. We see the war, we see the destruction, we see the sickness and the disease that's out there. And he's showing us those things, and the purpose is there. Look at what sin brings. Do we want to be a part of that? It's there, but and it's it's there, and it's theirs, and we can make the determination to not be a part of that. Yahweh has opened our eyes. He's giving us the opportunity. We're being called. We understand why these things are coming about. We understand what causes birth defects, right? We understand it stems from this God worship, this practice of these unbridled lust, these sexual sins is what brings all these things about. We see people out there with birth defects, and we know what's causing it, what brings it on. When we see that, do we want to be a part of that? Is that anything that we want to be a part of? I don't want to be a part of it, and I don't think there's a single man or a single individual here that wants to be a part of that. But Pastor, he continues here, and he shows here, he says, I dare call your attention to these things. Don't stop these things, but they continue to teach them. As you innocently watch your television, you can see these things are getting, and at the time that this was written all the way back in 1990. Yeah, this was all the way back in 1990. Chapter 1 was published in the 1990 issue of the Prophetic Word, but this book was published in looks like September of 1992. Think about how things have changed since then, especially with the entertainment industry. As you innocently watch your television set or simply go to the movies, you will see the same perverted sex worship which is being promoted by the churches. Unlawful, perverted sex, along with the worship of the pagan holidays which are responsible for it. And they're getting bolder with it. Before there were certain things that they wouldn't allow that could not be shown on TV. Way back when, a married couple, you wouldn't even see a married couple in the same bed. They would be in two single beds. Separate. They want to be on one side of the room, one be on the other side of the room. What do they show now? There's nothing off limits now. Nothing. And it's invading, and it's not just in the movie theaters, but it's invading in that little box called the TV. And worse than that, there's a worse trap out there than that. It's called the internet. The internet, it can be a very, very dangerous place to be. But from a book entitled The Keys of This Blood, written by the Catholic priest Malachi Martin, we find that there was an enthronement ceremony for Satan actually performed in the Vatican in Rome. So there was an enthronement. It was actually performed for Satan in the Vatican in Rome with the acknowledgement of pedophilia, the so-called, in loose quotes here, the love of the children in a sexual sense. From this book we read here, it says, most frightening for John Paul, he had come up against the irremovable presence of a malign strength in his own Vatican and in certain bishops and chanceries. It was known, it was what notable or knowledgeable churchmen called the superforce. Rumors, or always difficult to verify, tied its installation to the beginning of Pope Paul VI's reign in 1963. Okay? Indeed, Paul had alluded somberly to the smoke of Satan, which has entered the sanctuary, an oblique reference to an enthronement ceremony by Satanists in the Vatican. Besides, the incidence of satanic pedophilia rites and practices was documented among certain bishops and priests as widely dispersed as Turin in Italy and in South Carolina in the United States. Now, that was all the way back in when? 1963? Do you think it stopped? Not in the least. The cultic acts of satanic pedophilia are considered by professionals to be the accumulation of the fallen archangel's rites. On page 633 of the same book, Pope John Paul is quoted, "No," he said in response to one question, "the church cannot be reformed at the present moment." The fallen archangel is none other than Satan the devil, who is now documented to be ceremonially enthroned in the Vatican itself. What do we see throughout this religious world today but sex and war promoted throughout the God-worshiping churches and assemblies? You know, the churches, they don't stand up against it. They don't stand up against any of these things. Remember Isaiah chapter 2 and Micaiah 4:1, where it talks about in the last days, where it shows that that many people will say, "Come and let us go up to the house of Yahweh, to the house of the Father of Jacob, where we will learn of his ways." And then it goes on to continue. It says they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And it shows nation will not lift up sword against nation, and neither will they do what? Neither will they learn war anymore. So what is that saying? What is the scripture saying there? It's saying that war is being taught in the churches. We know that war is being taught in the churches because they're not teaching the law of peace. They're not teaching the laws of Yahweh. But sex and war are being promoted, and even through the Pope's own words, rejecting, saying, we don't have to follow those 613 man-made rules. Just do what's right in your own heart. Basically what he's saying, isn't it? Trust in your own heart. What does the scripture say about somebody who trusts in their own heart? Are they the wisest person on the face of the earth? He who trusts in his own heart is considered a what? Praise Yahweh, considered a fool. Considered a fool. We see the same legalized vice that has been practiced since pagan antiquity as today's modern preachers promote safe sex with condoms. We also see unmarried and teenagers sacrificing their virginity to the gods, to the same gods and goddesses worshipped with unlawful sexual intercourse since pagan antiquity, now worshipped throughout Christianity in these same rites where lust is glamorized and murder is accomplished as the abortion rate increases. Okay, lust is glamorized. Yeah, lust is glamorized. I mean, the entertainment industry has it glamorized. All of these things, all of these practices, Pastor has showed us time and time again, all of these practices are glamorized through Hollywood. But they show these things as Satan did Eve. Satan enticed Eve and showed, look how wonderful this is. Look how great it's going to be. You're going to be as the gods. You're going to know righteousness and evil. Just think of how great this is going to be. You're not going to be held down. You're not going to be kept under the thumb of Yahweh. You're not going to be squashed down and restricted by these old laws. Salvation doesn't come that way. It was glamorized, but they never show the consequences that come from that. You're never shown that when they have these, when they have these so-called television shows that are supposedly on a child-safe channel. Okay, there's no such thing as a child. There is such thing as a child-safe channel, by the way. It's called Yahweh Prophetic Television. That's the child safe channel. Okay? But it's definitely not of this world. You know, nothing that Hollywood promotes is going to be a child safe channel, because what are they teaching? Years ago, I saw an advertisement for a television show, and it was geared toward young teenagers and those who are approaching the teen years. And it showed two boys kissing, and that was on the previews. And this has been several years ago. I couldn't imagine what they're promoting and showing on that at this time. But that is just one instance. And we know it's getting worse and worse. Now, these fertility rites here, these fertility rites of sex worship are still practiced today. During each and every pagan holiday which is celebrated throughout this world, you still see the ancient pagan fertility rites practiced, which are still the abominations of sex worship since antiquity. Another fact remains: since this world celebrates these rites, the same world has been overtaken in a frenzy of lust and sexual perversion. You know, it's rampant. I mean, that's the thing that's on people's minds. You know, that is a thing that consumes. That literally consumes the people. You know, that consumes them. And not one person seems to realize what has taken place. It says, from the Encyclopedic Dictionary of Religion, we find these modern fertility rites practiced worldwide. Let's see here if we can. We'll see if we can get through here through this here today. Yeah, we should. It says fertility cults, concerned as they were with agriculture, fertility cults, linked by ritual magic with the passage of seasons and vegetative growth. They were a means of explaining the miracle of a seed's development from planting in the source of all life, the earth mother, to harvest. It says, for example, here it says, women of Finnish peasantry once scattered their breast milk over furrows prior to the crops being sowed. In Germany, only women have been allowed to sow grain. The soil, identified with woman, the womb, and sexuality, was supposedly made fertile by the magic practices of the farmer. It says, in Hungary to this day, girls are sprinkled with water on Easter Monday. In exchange, they give the young men Easter eggs, cookies with nuts, and flowers, all ancient fertility symbols. The Hungarian custom of planting quickly growing grain at Christmas or Easter may go back to the Near Eastern harvest of Adonis. Death also played an important role in fertility cults. The burial of the dead in the soil was viewed as a completion of the cycle in which life arose from and returned to the earth. In order to effect a bountiful harvest as the accumulation of the growing season, sacrifices of grain and animals, and in some cases even of humans, were made. It says sacrifices, festivals, and other ceremonies celebrated the end of the harvest. These were in most respects identical to those taking place at the planting time. Thus, the growing season divided at its beginning and end, and the new and old years. Gods and divinities of fertility are common in the most diverse religions. They include the mother goddess figure and her mate, also sometimes her son, who are united in a sacred marriage. And this is all part of that ancient fertility worship, that cycle. The father, husband, the mother, husband / son that takes place. So what we'll do, men, it is 8 o'clock. We'll stop here on page 192, and we'll pick up here next week. May Yahweh be with you and bless you.